Unbeknownst to my paramour, I hatched a machination for our commemoration of the day of Valentine's. Only, its arrival was marked by a grievous estrangement. Basically, she said I can't talk that way anymore. Dialogue and finding voice can be very difficult. The way people relate to each other through communication is so important. So in the spirit of the holiday, let's talk about you and me, baby. I'm DC Ferguson, author of the Wicked Instruments series, and this is the Worldbuilding Dojo. You see what I did there? Yeah, I know you see what I did there. Clever little title cards. Anyway, conversational dialogue is a tricky beast, because your world works even if your dialogue's broken, so it's difficult to know when it's not working. Why do we care about that? Well, the voice of your character shows the audience who they are and how they operate. It separates them from other characters in your story and makes them more real. Sure, you can have a world with a great story and two-dimensional characters and still have it at least be mildly enjoyable. More often, though, and I'm assuming that's why everybody's here, we want it to be the best we can, so two-dimensional ain't gonna cut it. As long as I've been writing, I've been a big fan of engaging dialogue. This is the metric by which I gauge every story I write, because it's been the metric I've judged every movie and book I've enjoyed. So, let's look at a conversation done wrong and a conversation done right, and then talk about why they're so different.
You said yourself you thought about taking him out.
Fucking said that.
Yeah, I did, okay? I did. But that was then. Right now, this guy is the only one I completely trust. He's too fucking homicidal to be working with the cops.
You taking his side?
No! Fuck sides, man! What we need here is a little solidarity. Somebody's sticking a red hot poker up our ass. I want to know whose name's on the handle.
I used to know a girl. She had a dozen guys. One of them found out about it, beat her up so bad she ended up in a hospital on Guerrero Street.
What a story, Mark.
Yeah, you can say that again.
I'm so happy I have you as my best friend, and I love Lisa so much.
Okay, so aside from the fact that the second one was written by a kindergartner and acted about as well, there are a few things to look at in these two dialogue choices. In any given conversation, there's a sort of tennis match going on. The ball is served, then conversation bounces back and forth on the topic. It doesn't matter how many people are in the game, it only matters how the game goes until someone gets a point. In the first example, Mr. Blonde and Mr. White are ready to kill each other. They've served the ball back and forth, each one daring the other to start a fight. Mr. Pink jumps in to break things up. Mr. White calls sides, but Mr. Pink won't have any of it. He wins the conversation, for lack of a better term. Now we can shift gears to another topic. In the example in the room, there's this unnatural, jerky dialogue with one character talking about a girl getting hospitalized, and the response is a bizarre laugh followed by the main character talking about what a great story it was and what a good friend the other guy is. The tale of the woman getting hurt was more like a hurdle in the conversation for the main character to leap over and keep moving. And, by the way, I don't recommend this film to anyone. The whole thing is like this. So, there, I just saved you a little over an hour of your life you'd never get back. Just like in real life, you should be checking yourself against the last line of dialogue and asking yourself, is this a realistic response? Would I say this? How would I feel if I heard this conversation? Natural responses are important because rich dialogue gives each character in the conversation a chance to be unique. They can have their own style of speaking, their own views, their own personal experiences that flesh out or influence decision-making. That's more important than you think, because we're about to run into a couple of pitfalls where this goes way wrong. You can actually make a character cliché by the way that they speak. What do I mean? I'm so glad you asked, because that very question is going to get us in a whole lot of trouble. See, one of the many things I've done in my life besides mastering Kung Fu and friendship is tech support. And that is the art of taking complex concepts and explaining them like you're talking to a child while they're in the middle of watching their favorite cartoon. They're not paying attention and wouldn't understand a word you say if they were. With that said, there's a line you never cross in conversations with people outside your field. A person on the phone asking about their computer box is not going to have me telling them about latency and packet loss and their ping requiring immediate service. I'm just going to say, your internet, slow, me send help. This same thing happens in dialogue so much you probably don't even notice it anymore, but the sin kind of goes like this. There's some technobabble, then there's give it to me in English, doc, followed by an overly simplified explanation or analogy, and then finally the audience gets a cookie for understanding a difficult concept. The whole conceit of dialogue like this is completely wrong. No nerdy scientist is going to delve into such an explanation because the last thing anyone wants to do is have to break down the individual parts of what they say. For a completely different take on it, when I call tech support, I'll immediately tell them, I do your job, let's talk on that level. You can audibly hear a sigh of relief. The reaction is organic and real because the person now understands they're speaking to a colleague and can speak in their native jargon and be understood. The art of communication among experts in a given field is taking what you and your team have mastered and dumbing it down enough to explain it to the people who sign your paychecks. This just doesn't apply to technobabble either. The plucky young reporter is badgering a cop because she's got to get her scoop. The tough guy is being tough because that's what tough guys do. Now, I'm going to lay a curse upon you, and I'm so sorry for it, but once you've heard this, you can't unhear it. If you want to play a little drinking game and get wasted really fast, and I mean really fast, watch any technical drama and do a shot anytime you hear the words "don't you see," followed by a plot explanation. I guarantee you, it doesn't matter if it's a medical procedural, a crime drama, or Star Trek Deep Space Nine, you will hear this phrase a lot. It has to be one of the biggest crutches in television writing history. Don't you see? Often, it's not easy to convey big ideas and motivation into a small segment of dialogue, so one character has to spell it all out to the audience and walk them through the plot. In writing, this is actually breaking a rule called show don't tell. In television, it still happens all the time, but mostly on serialized network dramas. Dialogue between strangers, dialogue between friends, and dialogue between coworkers. We all talk to people in our lives and relate to them in vastly different ways. It doesn't change who we are. Your dialogue should reflect that. You don't get extra points for packing in a lot of technical speak if you're only going to have to explain it again in different terms anyway. The other side of that coin is that if your audience is savvy, or if you can nail context clues really well, you don't have to explain yourself twice. Oh yes, you know that means it's deep cut time. So let's look at an absolute classic, A Clockwork Orange. Yes, we love the film. I mean, oh god, I can't tell you how much I love this film. But no, let's actually look at the book, which is not entirely different, at least as it pertains to dialogue.
As we walked along the flat block marina, I was calm on the outside, but thinking all the time. So now it was to be Georgie the General, saying what we should do and what not to do, and Dim as his mindless, grinning bulldog. But suddenly I vidded that thinking was for the gloopy ones, and that the omni ones used like inspiration and what bogs ends.
This story follows Alex, a monstrous sociopath terrorizing a British town with his gang. This book purposefully used a kind of teenage speak that doesn't exist, with words that are made up for the book. Because Alex himself is our narrator, the whole of this book is in his native language. There are a lot of reasons for the made-up words, not the least of which is to make us feel like we're outsiders in his world. We're too old and we don't belong. It's like we're reading someone else's diary, like the words weren't meant for us to understand. As such, there is zero, and I mean zero explanation, offered for these words in the book. Your only hope of understanding what these words mean is by using the context that they're in to figure out their meaning. Author Anthony Burgess does a phenomenal job of that feat, and halfway through the book, you can use all of Alex's words confidently and know what they mean when you see them on the page. This is the kind of dialogue that makes you want to rise to its level instead of the other way around, but it's also not tall or complicated in an order that gets in the way of a narrative. Now, if we really want to get in the way of a narrative, let's talk about the two things dialogue most often does wrong. Nothing derails a conversation faster than someone going into a personal monologue about love or death and then getting all choked up and then... You see how awkward that silence gets? When we perceive negative emotion, particularly emotion we don't share, there's this void that's left and it's very uncomfortable. See, most all of us are capable of empathy, that is, to feel what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. But when the emotion on display isn't relatable, or it's a you had to be there kind of memory, we can't laugh with the person or cry with the person because we can't empathize. Now, two things that dialogue handles very poorly, especially in film, are the cases of love and death. TV and film are big heavy-handers with this sin because they have to do the double duty of conveying personal feelings to the audience while having it inside a dialogue, so you get sort of stunted moments. Now, love is beautiful. Admitting it to someone when you're not sure that the feeling is mutual, well, it comes with a lot of fear, P. In lasting relationships, it's a big moment when two people realize they're in love with each other. In film, it's often the punchline, the climax of a romantic story arc that was building the whole way through. It's often projected with confidence, and the kiss is actually no different than the winning touchdown in the sports ball movie. Death is even more goofy, because in order to convey a backstory with death involved, it has to come up in dialogue, even when that's not always natural. Now, most of the time, the solution to these problems is to pull from personal experience. Keep in mind, I don't think you should run right out and experience the death of a loved one if you haven't before. People are, in general, pretty guarded about deep personal emotions more than they're not. That means if a stranger is in the room, that means if there's a lot of people in the room, that means if they're in the middle of a conflict, shields don't come down. Raw emotion is usually expressed one-on-one, despite what reality TV would make you think. So, the big speech professing love to stop the wedding, stopping her from getting on the plane, the "I've learned something today" speech, well, how many times in your life have you ever seen this happen that wasn't on television? The lesson we take away from this, again, is to reach for a hot cup of realism. A conversation on paper or coming out of your mouth should sound the same. And that would bring us to our next point. In fantasy and sci-fi, there is a call for speech patterns that don't always fall under what we call normal. Old-timey speech that adds a lot of THs to the end of words is sometimes necessarieth. Sometimes it's we're not. As we discussed with A Clockwork Orange, there's a happy medium where dialogue sounds natural and foreign at the same time, but it can't bog down the reading. I'm going to have to get a little old school here and get with our boy Shakespeare, but not for the reasons you might think. Shakespeare has this amazing quality that transcends time, but that's for a reason.
What thou drawn among these heartless hinds? Turn thee, Benvolio, and look upon thy death.
I do but keep the peace. Put up thy sword, or manage to depart these men with me.
Peace? Peace? I hate the word.
Shakespeare's words were alien even in his own time. People didn't talk like that. And more importantly, the words weren't written to be read. Sorry for all my English teachers that assigned me innumerable amounts of his plays to read, but Shakespeare was always intended to be viewed on a stage. The reason for this is that tone, energy, and body language do all the heavy lifting where the dialogue fails. That's not a commentary that Shakespeare's bad, quite the opposite. He's a timeless master of the stage. We're not writing for the stage. Well, maybe some of you are. And again, if you are writing stage plays, I'm also a theater nerd, so I'll just remind you that the Master of Kung Fu and Friendship will make a blanket fort with you and read your stage play and we'll be best friends. That said, though, we're hunting after what we can slam on a page and have it do all the work for us. Now, many will say do not even write accents on your page, for example. To hell with that. Of Mice and Men is loaded with that very rule breaker, and it's one of the most important pieces of fiction ever written. Oh, you didn't know?
You ain't got no right to come into my room. Ain't nobody got a right to be in here but me.
I seen your light.
Well, I got a right to have a light. Now, I ain't wanted in those bunkhouses, and you ain't wanted in my room.
Why ain't you want it?
Because I'm black. You say I stink when I tell you all of y'all stink to me.
Everybody went into town.
Well, what you want?
Nothing. I seen your light.
Every word spoken in that scene was written that way in the book. I'll be the first to admit, by today's standards, it may even be a bit heavy-handed, and it teeters on hard to understand at times. We could stand to maybe dial it back a little, but this is as close as you get to perfect. Game of Thrones does it too, all the time, and you're barely noticing it.
Are no threat to us.
But how do we know these dragons are just curiosities, and not the beasts that brought the whole world to heel?
Because we have been told as much by the many experts who serve the realm by counseling the king on matters about which he knows nothing.
But I haven't been counseled.
You are being counseled at this very moment.
This lesson is about understanding that words can change but feeling remains the same. I suggest arriving at the feeling first, in plain English, and then mold and alter the words accordingly. That guy just called out my main hero, a shiny metal tin can of the Templars. What is he going to say? My first feeling is, if you want to step outside, I'll send you crying home to mama. But in older speech, do not mistake my temperance for weakness, fool, lest I reach for my steel and show you the difference. We have slightly altered speech patterns that is a little bit more formal than casual speak. We slip in some old-timey words, but the flow works, and there's no impediment to understanding. We're looking for that as often as humanly possible. So, quite a few closing thoughts on this one. Dialogue is every character's chance to shine as their own real person. If we want our audience to fall in love with the character, then they need to feel like someone we'd want to hang out with. If there's one thing to take away from this entire video, it's to cut all the bad habits of TV and film that'll give you. Cut the tropes in conversation to near zero if you can. Now, since we didn't get too much into it here, I'd love for you to check out my blog at artofthearcane.com for a more thorough analysis of using technobabble and future speak in your dialogue. It's a great companion to this video. Always remember you can check out my latest videos at artofthearcane.com, and you can also sign up for my newsletter there and hear about the Wicked Instruments series and all of my projects. Help out the Master of Kung Fu and Friendship by hitting that like and subscribe button to hear about new videos. And as always, I'm DC Ferguson. Now have fun and get crafting.